As we celebrate Black History Month, we honor the stories and lessons and legacies of African American leaders whose influence continues to shape our nation and our world.
Hey, you awesome folks! Thanks for taking this journey of discovery with your guide, Keith Haney. You're listening to the Becoming Bridge Builders podcast, your favorite podcast for everything from racial reconciliation to education innovation, justice reform, and leading change in the 21st century. This podcast is for people who love to be challenged with difficult topics, but want practical solutions to solve these challenging issues. Becoming Bridge Builders makes change possible. Each week on the podcast, Keith invites innovative thought leaders to share how they are building bridges in their area of expertise. You will hear breakthrough ideas and concepts that are changing the world. He's featuring guests who are best-selling authors, leaders at Microsoft, entrepreneurs, leading educators, professors, lawyers, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can be the bridge to the change you are seeking.
Welcome to Becoming Bridge Builders, the podcast where we bring together leaders, thinkers, and visionaries who are working every day to build bridges across cultures, communities, and experiences. I am your host, Keith Haney, and I'm so glad you're spending time with us today. As we celebrate Black History Month, we honor the stories and lessons and legacies of African American leaders whose influence continues to shape our nation and our world. Today's guest is someone whose voice, leadership, and insights are helping shape the next generation of executives and change makers. Byron Witherspoon Sr. is in-demand speaker of corporate, academic, and civic audiences, trusted by Fortune 500 companies, national nonprofits, and major universities. He's a best-selling author, TEDx speaker, nationally recognized leadership expert, and the founder of the Black Exec LLC, a company dedicated to preparing the next generation of executives to lead America's most complex organizations. His latest book, The Black Exec, is the #1 release and a full-year Amazon bestseller, and a National Indie Excellence Award finalist. His first book, The Fallacy of Affinity, is already in the third printing. Barron is recognized among the top 50 multicultural leaders and the top 100 most influential African-American leaders in business, and one of the most influential leaders among business social graduates. We welcome him to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good to have you on, my friend.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
We were just sharing offline that you are an HBC grad as well as myself. So we shout out to the HBCs and the production of people that they produce. So we're looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very proud of that. And Tuskegee University, I think, is still standing tall. So we're
That's right.
Very excited.
So I'm going to ask you my favorite question, Barron. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've received is no matter how thin you slice the bologna, it always has another side.
Like that. Is that bologna fried or is it?
Yeah, you can apply that to fried or just straight out of the wrapper. But yeah, that saying has stuck with me. Yeah, I heard that first from my mom. But really, it talks about listening. And being able to understand both sides of an issue. It also really talks about critical thinking, because a lot of times people will take us a tidbit and sort of run with it without really, doing the work to collect and gather the full story. So I use that often in my interactions with people to kind of bring a little levity, but also to really make that serious point that we need to consider all sides of a problem.
That's helpful because in our society today, we don't seem to do that. We don't think the other side has any value. If you don't agree with me, then we dismiss you and your opinion. So I appreciate the fact that
Absolutely. You know, it's funny you say that. I was talking with a friend about that very point just 2 days ago, and really making the point that the conversation has become so polarized in every vector. And I think that's been intentional, right? To drive this sort of polarization of thinking so that people, the only way that they can be right is to agree with you.
right.
Right. And so that really doesn't leave much room for exploration, for inquiry, for growth and development or any of that. Right? It's sort of my way or the highway, and I think that our society is unfortunately completely stuck in a rut of that kind of thinking across virtually all aspects of life.
And I always tell my kids the best way to control people is to have them fight and being conflicted so that you don't have to worry about actually selling them on anything you try to promote. You just get them mad at each other. They're too distracted to realize what's going on around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're victimized by that. I think mostly in society today, people no longer really know how to reach agreement.
Right.
Right? Um, and that's a very important muscle when you're dealing with people, because we don't come to things from the same perspective. We always have varying perspectives, and so therefore, reaching agreement becomes an important, sort of survival mechanism, right?
Right.
And I think we're losing that rapidly.
Yeah. You and I had talked about earlier about, doing a podcast doing Black History Month. And I think when I think of Black History Month, to me, it's a time of dedicated to reflecting on our strengths, our perseverance, and the brilliance of Black leaders throughout history. What does Black History Month kind of mean to you personally?
I mean, for me, it's always meant, focusing on pride of accomplishment, right? I think when Carter G. Woodson started Black History Week, back in the day, which is the precursor to Black History Month, I think that's what he had in mind is really attacking the narrative where Black people were being portrayed as not really having made any significant contributions, to society and really been a kind of a people that had to be carried along by other people and held up by other people and supported by other people. And I think what Woodson was saying was that's not exactly true. In fact, it couldn't be further from the truth, right? That we have been all along, even from the early days, making contributions, significant contributions to the development of the society. So that pride of accomplishment, I think, is what Black history is about. And, I think we have a lot to be proud of when we look back across all walks of life. When we look across all disciplines, Black people have excelled. And a lot of that is due to their resilience, right? Our resilience as a people, being able to find ways around systems that have been set up to keep us from succeeding. So Black History Month is very important. We need to keep reminding ourselves and reminding our children that we have a legacy to uphold of people that really made a difference, and it's up to us to keep making a difference.
When I moved to Iowa, it's kind of fun. I love to learn the history of the state that I moved into. And Iowa had some really interesting um, Black history people. One of them was George Washington Carver. He went to Iowa State University, got his degree there. The stadium, Jack Trice Stadium, is named after one of the first Black football players at Iowa State. He actually got stomped to death on the field by the University of Minnesota during a contest, and Iowa State refused to play University of Minnesota for I think it was like 4 decades because they were so mad about the fact that they had done that to one of their players. So Iowa has this really rich history of Black history that a lot of people don't realize about Iowa. And so I'm curious, as you think about people that have impacted your life, who are some leaders, some Black figures that really were meaningful to you?
Well, there are quite a number. I think you can't help if you went to Tuskegee. You can't help thinking about the contributions of people like Dr. Carver, George Washington Carver, who Booker T had asked to come and teach there. And Carver did breakthrough research, which is still being utilized today. And many researchers are still, looking at his work to understand how to make further advancements in botany and in zoology and in agriculture. And so, we grew up by going to an HBCU like Tuskegee. We grew up with figures whose shoulders we were standing on. The Booker T, I think, made a lot of contributions to the evolution of Black thought, right? As to how Black people were putting into practice, what they were learning. And he created a lot of didactic methods, teaching methods that are broadly used today, and really are needed today, because he was all about focusing on using the head, the heart, and the hand together, right, to make a difference in society. So many folks from history have impacted my thinking and how I have developed as a person. And I think the folks like Dr. King and others who used oratorical skills to really amplify the condition of our people over time, I think was important, because I try to speak into the current reality myself. And so I look back, at how they chose to do that at similarly challenging times in the history of the United States, and I use that to shape my own approach to amplifying my voice.
I love it. So you spent your career guiding executives and emerging leaders through complex environments. From your perspective, what are some of the most pressing leadership challenges facing Black professionals today?
Hmm. Man, I mean, there are many, but what I would focus folks on is what I like to call mastery, because we can tend to look at what's going on kind of in the current moment and see it as some kind of really special, discrete thing that's going on. But reality is that we're just moving from moment to moment, right? There's always a moment. There's always a challenge. And what we need to be universally focused on, regardless of the moment, is what I call personal mastery. Now, when I talk about mastery, especially in the context of a career or business, right, I'm really talking about two types of mastery. One is what I call experiential mastery, and that's all about getting the most out of the environments that you find yourself working in. Right, if you've got assignments, like you go from assignment to assignment in your career. How do you really get everything out of those assignments, so that you're prepared then to take on additional responsibility? And that experiential, mastery is very, very important. But then there's also a kind of environmental mastery, right? And the difference is that the experiential is really about doing more, right? Getting more out of what you're doing, but the environmental is about seeing more, right? And what I like to talk about is, how do we teach our young generation how to be in the exact same situation with other people, but be able to see more of what is actually happening in that environment, right? It's kind of like the training that they use for a lot of folks in law enforcement and military training, where they might take people and put them in an environment, and then take them out after a brief period of time and ask them, what did they see? Right.
Right.
And, if you keep doing that and you're putting people in and out very quickly, they learn to see things, more quickly. Right. And they learn to see more of what is there. We need to train our minds in that regard to be able to see more of what is there. Like you and I, Keith, we could go into the same environment, and we could come out and you could see 10 things and I could see 100 things. We're both 100% correct. We're both 100% correct. But it's just that I saw more than you saw in the same environment. Right.
Right.
And so that's really what I mean by mastery, mastering how to see more and how to do more.
So, as you think about training people to see more, what are some key things you would say? Here's how you go into an environment and become an observer of that environment to gain the most from it you can possibly gain.
Yeah. I think, when you're trying to see more, what you're really training your mind to do is be conscious, right? To be at a higher consciousness, of what's going on in the environment that you're in. And you can do that through studying the environments, right? If you're in a particular environment and that environment has certain tendencies, right? Then you can look for those tendencies when you're in the environment. They'll help you see, more of what's going on in the environment versus just, what is right in front of you. You're able to now have that peripheral vision to sort of see other things that may be at play. And you think about your own experiences, and I think about my experiences. This was crucial, right? Because there was always a lot going on. And if I just had my head down, sort of doing my work, and not really seeing what was going on around me, I could do my work, better than everyone around me and still not get the result that I'm expecting because I had all these other blind spots, right? Where I was not seeing other factors that would impact my growth and development. So I think we have to. It's not something you can just wish into existence. You have to really sort of train your mind, right, to see more. We also need to have people around us who see things, who can then share with us what they saw, right? And we used to do that quite a lot when I was working in the corporation, where I would have my colleagues, talk to me about, hey, we just witnessed this weird thing in this meeting, right? Let's come together and talk about what you saw and what I saw, right? And that'll allow us to start to put the whole puzzle together. So it's about building the strength inside yourself and surrounding yourself with others who can help you to develop that sense, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about your latest book, The Black Executive. It continues to gain national attention. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, it's interesting. When I was prosecuting my own career, I would run into Black folk, all over the world, right? And you have a brief conversation with another Black executive, and it would just strangely be similar, right? People would be having the same kinds of experiences, and in a certain way, that is reassuring, right? Because it means you're not the only one having these experiences. But then there's a tragedy in it, which is that we all keep having and repeating the same experiences, right? Versus somebody having taken the time to sort of write this stuff down so that folks don't have to experience it the way that we experienced it. And that really was the impetus for the book. How can I write down what will happen to our folks as they enter these large, complex organizations so they can have a bit of a roadmap to understand what's coming? So, the frame of the book is the Black exec and the 7 myths, right? And these myths are, entertaining ways, really, of explaining what is going to happen to our people as they go through their experience. And so the book is a playbook. It is organized chronologically, so to speak, so that the things that will happen to you early in your career come first in the book, and the things that will happen later come later. And so you move from issues of belonging and inferiority and that sort of stuff all the way to issues of valuation, right? How you're valued by the organization. And so I wrote it for young people, but it's relevant to anyone. But it's really written to that next couple of generations that are entering the workforce now.
I love it. So let's get into some of the myths. I'm kind of curious as you think about this. Which myth do you think most people um, may be surprised by from reading it?
Hmm. Well, I think the first 3 myths. I think the surprise will be that most people who read that will be able to relate quickly to those first 3 myths because they're going to say, "Wow, I experienced that." They may have even experienced it in their academic career, right? So it may not even wait for their professional career to start experiencing it. The first one is belonging, followed by inferiority, and then awareness. And belonging is, where people kind of, somebody in the organization is kind of making the assertion that the standards have been lowered so that you could come in. In other words, you don't belong. Right? It's a classic sort of, argument of affirmative action. You got in by affirmative action. You really weren't supposed to be here. Or now, in today's vernacular, DEI, right? Somehow DEI got you in, and you weren't, really supposed to be here. You didn't get here on merit. And it's all a sort of trumped up thing. That's why I call it a myth, right? But once you've been in the organization for a little while, it gets harder and harder for people to claim that you don't belong because you're actually here and you're doing the work. So then they kind of shift to the second myth, which is the myth of inferiority, where they say, "Hey, you might belong, you belong here, but you're just not as good as everyone else. The other people are better than you." Right? And after a while, you start performing and proving that they're really not better than you, right? And then they might morph into awareness. Well, if people knew you better in the organization, if they were aware of what you were doing, they might, you might get better results and so forth. And you know, all of this stuff is going to happen to you, but it's always going to be presented by somebody else about you. And so I talk about describing these myths in plain language and helping people see the myths before they happen.
So I was talking to another Black executive about some of the things you just mentioned in her book, and her book is about call and response. Seven Lessons from the Black Church. I think it's a fascinating concept. But she said part of what you describe with your myths here leads to Black people working twice as hard and suffering greater burnout the higher they get up the organization. How have you experienced that as you work with Black executives?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And most of the time when we hear that statement, it's viewed as kind of a literal quantitative statement. In other words, Keith put in 8 hours and I had to put in 16 hours, to do the same amount of work. That's really not what we're saying. Twice as hard is really not about the amount of hours, work or that sort of thing. What it is it's about the type of environmental conditions that we're working in, right? And I've heard it described as track and field runners, right? You got one person on a track running, 100 yards with no impediments, and then the other person is running there and they've got hurdles to climb over. But they, run the exact same distance, but one is having to overcome more in order to get to the goal. I think that's really what twice as hard is trying to describe. And I think that every Black exec that I have encountered that has enjoyed any success, particularly in corporate America, describes their own experience like that, where they have had to work very, very hard, when compared to their peer set, in order to really get the kind of recognition, which comes in the form of higher pay, promotions, which means increased responsibility, or opportunities outside of the organization, to represent the organization out in the industry and that sort of thing. Those kinds of opportunities are harder to come by, because they rely on other things. They don't rely strictly on productivity and merit. A lot of times they rely on relationships and who you know, and whether or not those people are willing to expose you to certain opportunities and things. So I tend to agree with what she said there, but you know, my experience is that morphs the how of that. How you end up doing more morphs over time as organizations, might reduce some barriers, but then increase other barriers. And I think that's what we're grappling with, and we're dealing with that right now.
Yeah. Tell me about the myth of silence. I'm that curious. I'm curious about that one.
Yeah, the myth of silence is the one that says they can't hear you, right? And what I recommend that people do is amplify their voice, right? But by amplifying their voice, I'm not talking about, speaking louder. I'm talking about amplifying or increasing the impact of your voice. So one of the things that used to happen to me quite often, and I've heard this from other Black execs that may have a similar style, is that when I would be in a lot of meetings and situations, I was um, never the first person to speak or feel like I had to have a point of view on everything that was said in the meeting. So when I would speak, people would go, "Whoa, that's deep," or like I'm speaking with some type of profundity, right? But it's because I'm trying to speak for impact and not speak to be heard. And so when you speak for impact, people have to respond to what you're saying. They have to do something, right? So when I say amplifying your voice, right, in order to overcome this idea that people in the organization or the right people in the organization can't hear you, right? You amplify your voice by amplifying that impact, and that can be the spoken word, but it can also be the written word. And one of the things I teach young people is that they need to fall in love with writing because ideas in a corporate context are not ideas until they've been captured in writing. So if you're sitting around the water cooler talking to Johnny and laying on him some great idea that you have, he goes off and writes the idea down and recommends it, and the company the company moves forward. No sense in getting mad at Johnny, right? Because it was just a combo, right? Until somebody wrote it down. And falling in love with writing, learning how to write for effect, where, I one of the biggest reputations I had in my career was when I wrote, people responded. They did something. I wrote for impact. And if they did not respond within the time frame that whatever time frame I allotted them, then they were going to hear back from me. I would follow up. And people kind of over time they knew that, so they usually respond pretty quickly. So that impact is the thing is the big thing in overcoming the myth of silence.
That's great. So in 2024, you founded the Black LLC, the Black Exec LLC. What motivated you to create this new venture, and how is it shaping the next generation of executives?
Yeah, that's a great question following the discussion that we just had, because I
Yeah,
did it really for two reasons. One is to amplify my own voice, but then also to get in touch with the next generation of leaders. So the work of the Black Exec is really twofold. One is, how do I get more efficient in spreading the messages of my work, right? Whether it's the book or it's opinion pieces that I'm writing, in Fortune or The Hill or wherever. I'm doing that because it's a more efficient way to get my point of view out, right? So if I can write, to a publication that has, 12 million readers, then I can take one action and get 12 million, impressions out of it, right? And so part of the Black Exec work is doing that. So I run a public speaking type of a arm out of the Black Exec. The other piece is really centered on getting in touch with young people. I do that through the writing because they're often the audience. Like I said, the audience for my book is young people. But I also do that through mentoring. So within the Black Exec, we just launched last year a program called SAIL, which is about student ambassadors and young leaders. And these are young people that we identify who I get an opportunity to work with in a direct mentoring capacity. So that's been beautiful, Keith. I just tell you, I've got a young lady now that I'm working with. Her name is Christina Brown, and she's a junior at Albany State. So here another HBCU, right? And she is just a rock star of a student, but also a talented leader. And so, we have a very systematic and regular interaction where I get a chance to mentor her directly, right? And she then takes advantage of my experience, to help her to be successful in her endeavors. And then I have another young man named Bakari Darbo. He graduated from Syracuse University. He's an entrepreneur, and working with him to kind of provide advice and counsel as he's off, doing his thing. So I like to take the sort of theoretical stuff that's in the book, and bring it down to the practical with people. And so that's what the LLC is doing.
So, if you had some advice for young aspiring Black executives who are just beginning their leadership journey, what advice do you have for them?
Focus on learning, right? Focus on being a learner. I think sometimes young people who have a difficult journey through their academic careers, when they graduate from school, they sort of see that as an opportunity to stop learning, right? And really, you have to continue to learn. You have to continue to push yourself to grow, to develop strong muscles in other areas, right? In order to be adaptable and effective as the environment changes around you. So, one of the things I do, and I have always done, since my younger days, is I read a lot. And this is one of the ways that I can manage my own learning, right? By reading books, reading articles, and I put those out, in my social media feeds. Hey, here's what I've read. Here's the last 12 books I've read this quarter. And here and share those with people, in hopes that they would then take a look at some of that work, or find the other things that they're interested in learning. But learning is really, really crucial. And I would encourage them, while they're doing all that reading, to also read the Black exec. um, that's going to help them for sure, because what I talk about in that book will most definitely happen to them. They will face it in their careers.
So, what I admire about talking to you and interacting with you and get a chance to meet you is that you are a true bridge builder. You didn't just become an exec and then all of a sudden stay at the top and go, wow, I made it. This is so great. You're reaching back to the younger generation to build a bridge to get them to where you're trying to get. If you're talking to today's young leaders, regardless of what their background is, how can they become better bridge builders in their workplace and in their community?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's a very central question, because my own personal purpose is to be a bridge builder. My purpose in life is to glorify God by bringing people together across barriers to achieve something significant or even eternal. That's my purpose. So everything that I'm doing, you'll find it, intersecting with that purpose. If it doesn't match with that purpose, I don't do it. I discard that opportunity and go on to ones that do. So bridge building is a matter of course for me. But I think in order to be an effective bridge builder, one of the things that I think we can do, or young people, or whether they're young or not, is get in touch with who we are, right? And I'll tell you, Keith, in my experience, people really are not very in touch with who they are. If I ask 10 people in a room what is their purpose, 9 of them will definitely struggle to answer that question. People do not do the work to understand what their own unique purpose is in life. And this is very important because, while we're out here talking about authenticity and all that sort of stuff, people don't know who they are. So I struggle to understand how they can be authentic, right? Or how they can bring their so-called authenticity to the table when they have no idea who they are themselves. And that's actual real work, right? There's work of discovery that we have to do in order to get in touch with who we are. And so, I think that that's important in the context of leadership, because great leaders lead from the core out, right?
Right.
We lead from who we are out to who we're leading. If we go inside ourselves and we have a lack of clarity there, or we have confusion there, then guess what's going to come out, right? Unclear messaging, right? Or confusion is going to come out. And the only hope that we have is to maybe borrow somebody else's identity and try to proclaim whatever they're proclaiming, right? Versus actually working out of our own core by being in touch with who we are. So that's the work. Get in touch with who you are, and understand your own purpose, and then leverage that to build bridges with other people, right? Because that's going to be sustainable. You'll always be able to be that same person, for the people that you're trying to bring together. And I think that's critically important.
Yeah, it does make sense. So I'm gonna ask you my other favorite question. What legacy do you want to leave behind?
Legacy. Wow. That's a loaded question. um, I'm working on legacy in multiple vectors. I mean, in one sense, I want to leave a legacy of thought leadership, right? That I used my experiences and I used my abilities, to think critically about the world and what's going on around me. And I was able to form and frame real ideas that exist in the public domain after I'm gone, right? And that's why I focus on writing, because those things will be around when I'm no longer around. So that's part of the legacy. The other thing is, you might see pictures of horses and stuff behind me. That's a big part of my family legacy. And so I spend a considerable amount of energy, achieving, uh, for the sake of my family legacy, um, various things within the equine, um, ecosystem. And that's been a lot of fun and labor of love and all of that good stuff. But that's about legacy, and trying to, um, make a difference today, but a difference that will last into tomorrow.
That's great. On season 6 of the podcast, we're doing something new, and that's a surprise question. Pick a number between 1 and 8 for your surprise question.
I'll go with 7, the number of completion.
Okay. Which band or artist, dead or alive, would you play at your funeral?
I'd have to go with some Sam Cooke maybe, because I'm sure Sam could offer something that would be appropriate.
All right. That's good. I love that. So, Baron, where can people find you? Where can they buy your books and connect with you on social media?
Yeah, I would say the easiest way to get in touch with what I'm doing is go to my website, theblackexec.com. Of course, I'm on all the socials, so folks can definitely reach out and touch us there. And we're hopeful, right, for the future generations, and so we're trying to be a part of the conversation. And if you want to plug in how we're doing that, that would be the best way to do it.
Where can I get your newsletter? Because your newsletter is something I got to have we first met each other on.
Yeah, the newsletter is available also on the website. They can go straight to the website and get the newsletter. And we actually republish the newsletter in LinkedIn as the articles come out.
Awesome. Well, Baron, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, your journey, and your passion for developing the next wave of leaders. Your work is helping shape a future where opportunity is not only accessible, but sustainable for all. For our listeners, if today's conversation inspired you, challenged you, or encouraged you, please share this episode with someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe to Becoming Bridge Builders so you'll never miss an episode. You can learn more about Baron's work, his books, and the Black Executive LLC by visiting his website and following his thoughts on leadership across digital platforms. Until next time, go out, build bridges, create connections, and be a force for good in this world. Thank you so much, Baron.
Thank you, Keith.
Do you know that most entrepreneurs hit a revenue ceiling and have no idea why? They're working harder, spending more money, running more ads, but revenue stays flat. My friend Dr. Noah St. John calls this the invisible break. He's giving our listeners a free revenue ceiling audit to help you see what's really holding you back. You'll get a free 30-day membership to NoahBot, giving you access to Dr. Noah's 30 years of experience to help you reach your next level. But hurry, because there's only 50 available this month. So if you're tired of being stuck at the same revenue level and want to finally break through, get your free revenue ceiling audit at drnoahvault.com in the affiliate link that'll be listed in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Bridge Builder. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at bkeithhaney and on Getter and Twitter at RevHeadpin. Thanks again and tune in next time.